I am now going to present a response that I sent to a publication that I had previously written for, based out of Chicago, Illinois, but not exclusively out of Chicago, Illinois, called the Electronic Intifada, which covers issues primarily in the Israeli Palestinian conflict, but also elsewhere that are of concern to Palestinians. I sent this with also an understanding that I have twice in my life actually had formal employment with legal firms. One that provided real estate and estate planning services, and another one that, well, dealt with capital defense here in the city, or here in Texas, specifically in Houston. I mentioned that because at the time I worked for this law firm that dealt with capital defense issues. It was a time frame during which the state of Texas was scheduled to perform the most executions in the history, not only of the state of Texas, but if I am correct, the history of the United States. There were more executions scheduled for for accomplishment during that year than in any year in the history of the state of Texas. I did not understand the ramifications of this at the time, but have since come to understand it a little more. And while I was working there, I attended a conference in Austin that was part of a national effort to end the death penalty. It was an abolitionist conference in regards to the death penalty. At the time, I considered myself to be an advocate for a full abolition of the death penalty. Now I am going to acknowledge that something very specific has happened, especially in the last 5 years, that has compelled me to change my mind. A, I have read opinions up to and including the level of the Supreme Court discussing the constitutional basis for capital punishment. And I've changed my mind, and I do agree with some of the constitutional justification regarding capital punishment. Secondly, I also understand that engaging in acts of capital punishment in accordance with the currently constituted Constitution of the United States and its impact on state constitutions that maintain their relationship within the federal compact of the United States of America has a very profound impact on what it means to address and provide protection against crime for people and citizens, and that a failure or refusal to appropriately engage in deterrence and or recalibration of punishments and penalties connected to the proliferation of crime allows for a possibility of inappropriate leveraging. And I believe there is a direct correlation between the increases in things like school shootings or other events that specifically target children, including in what would otherwise have been identified as a crime that would be eligible for capital punishment, and the refusal to actually move forward on and deliver on sentences of death in capital crimes. I believe there's a direct correlation. And I believe the political distinction between supporting various kinds of issues that are at times characterized as either about a liberal or conservative bent and may or may not fall along party lines is also directly connected to, on some level, a need to understand, especially if the individual involved in the legislative role has previous experience in the judicial branch, that there is a societal cost for refusing to engage appropriate implementation of the death penalty. And that outside of a specific change to the actual Bill of Rights, that this is something that has persisted. And so there needs to be greater specificity and there needs to be greater honesty about what it means to be in the United States, to claim to uphold the Constitution, and to also understand the constitutionally valid arguments regarding implementation of capital punishment. There's a societal cost, and we have been bearing it more and more over time, especially in consideration of other kinds of misrepresentations around criminal justice and or criminal justice reform. For that reason, at some point in 2019, I had reason to contact a publication where I had previously submitted an article regarding my understanding of a campaign to abolish the death penalty in another state. I sent this response on September 18th of 2019, um, and I'm going to read it now. After more than 15 years, it is important to reevaluate the premise presented in this article and update it for the modern times. No one wins the blame the victim game. Electronic Intifada, January 27th, 2003. I'd attempted to identify common points of struggle and movements in the U.S. for the abolition of the death penalty with the rights of Palestinians, including political prisoners and those who had been subjected to torture in the Middle East. I believe, however, it is time for me to retract the primary premise in this article and make a brief statement in light of current events. First, to conflate the struggle for abolition of the death penalty in the U.S. via procedural points regarding prosecution, as this article does, denies many other inherent problems with the U.S. criminal justice system. The article reflects a period of time when the expansion of the prison industrial complex in the U.S. was more than doubling the prison population. Attendant over the years with such an increase in prisoners have been reforms attempting to ameliorate some of the economic and other impacts that being imprisoned have on people. At the same time, labor and other standards have eroded, and the possibilities for developing alternative economies have been permitted to inculcate previously criminal practices under a form of normalization that sees to it that the street economy is permitted to replace actual movements for democracy and political equality. One could attempt to conflate how the concurrent expansion of the social welfare system in the U.S. that has correlated with the rollout and implementation of the Affordable Care Act has likewise created a system that provides for human services and distributions of resources connected to basic human needs as another form of replacement of political movement building, akin to the manners in which the international development model attempts to do the same in other parts of the world. However, this again refuses to address the real and material disparities in terms of political capital concentrated into the hands of Americans. After more than a decade and a half of state-sponsored U.S. actors attempting to address criminal justice reform while also using international movements as political leverage, we see how these contrived attempts to make all of us Palestinians do little to actually accomplish justice for Palestinians or ourselves. Additionally, the profundity of the crimes that are ongoing begs a deep soul-searching regarding one's perspectives on the death penalty itself. Treason is a federal crime punishable by death in the U.S. When it comes to matters of treason, one must first identify oneself as a loyalist. To what is one loyal? While concerns about struggles in other countries often allow the American to dream about the splendor of resistance by peoples abroad, we often fall far short of holding people in the U.S. to the same standards we would purport to espouse when it comes to demonstrating our solidarity with others. How can one say that seeking death via the criminal justice system for a grave offense is somehow less defensible when considering matters of compassion and mercy for one in another country who may have taken the life of a state-sponsored actor in an act of resistance? To take the criminal to trial, see to it that they are proven guilty, and then to commit to an act of official execution that is in the name of the country that one is loyal to is a serious and profound reflection on who we are and how we see ourselves. To exotify death in moments of resistance abroad while refusing to apply the same sort of critical lens to ourselves is merely to cooperate with the oppression of those for whom we claim to advocate. Being tortured by police should not be acceptable in any country. Being forced drugged for alleged or real security considerations should never be acceptable in any country. Being denied due process and made to perform illegal debt service should never be acceptable. Until the U.S. demonstrates its capacity to commit to addressing these concerns domestically, then we lack the moral or other authority to address matters in a comparable way abroad.